So let's say you earned $200 and you wanted to invest your money. You decide to give Apple $100 as a 10-year bond with a 2.4% interest rate, meaning that Apple will pay you 2.4% or $2.40 annually for 10 years and then pay you $100 back. You put your other $100 into a federal treasury bond at a 1.8% interest rate. A treasury bond is one issued by the US government, and it is virtually guaranteed that the government will be able to pay your money back. Apple must pay a higher interest rate because it has a greater risk of default or the inability to pay your money back. The bond market essentially runs on the interest rate of the 10-year federal treasury bond, as all companies must adjust their interest rates accordingly. So the other day, in an interview with CNBC, presidential candidate Donald Trump implied he would renegotiate treasury bonds, meaning he would pressure investors to accept less than 100 cents on the dollar. On your $100 loan, you would only receive about 95 back. And the only reason investors would agree to this is because of an increased interest rate. The bond's interest rate would jump to somewhere around 5%, potentially increasing one's profits. Apple bonds and every other company's interest rates will jump too, increasing the chance of default. So if Apple is unable to pay the higher interest rates, they'll be forced into default, and your $100 might never be repaid. This could cause a major economic crisis, as companies will lose significant money on interest and investors will not receive their money. So, to reiterate, Trump's idea to renegotiate Treasury bonds will ultimately cause a greater risk of default across the economy. To give a sense of the type of crisis this could cause, let's take a trip to 14th century Florence, a city known for its banking. Two main family banks exist, the Bardi and the Peruzzi. They span across much of Europe and are very wealthy and powerful. During the 1300s, both of these banks loaned vast sums of money to King Edward III of England, preparing for the Hundred Years' War. Usury, or the practice of charging interest, was outlawed, but as part of the loan, they gained the royal license needed to export wool. The banks began trying to monopolize wool and continued to lend money to King Edward III. In 1343, after realizing that the Hundred Years' War would go on for a while, Edward was forced into default, and the bank's money was never repaid. Both went into bankruptcy, and the individual investors whose money belonged to the banks lost huge amounts of money. This, along with the Black Death, ultimately resulted in a Great Depression that lasted well beyond the 1340s. So this just goes to show how defaulting on loans can cause major economic problems. Trump claimed he could cut all national debt in 8 years, which is simply impossible. There is no reason to abruptly solve the national debt. It's been there since the birth of the United States. Maybe try slowly minimizing the debt by cutting down interest rates, but why rush it and risk a crisis?